Ever wonder what's really happening when you crack your knuckles? Is it your bones grinding together, tiny explosions inside your joints, or just an oddly satisfying party trick? More importantly, should you stop, or is this just another health myth that refuses to die? What happens when you crack? You pull on a finger, twist your wrist, or press your knuckles together. Pop. And just like that, someone nearby cringes. You know that causes arthritis, right? But before you start questioning your life choices, let's get one thing straight. That sound isn't your bones grinding into dust. What's really happening inside your joints is far less horrifying and way more scientific. Inside every joint, there's a thick, slippery substance called synovial fluid. Think of it as nature's WD-40. It keeps your bones from scraping together like rusty hinges. Floating inside that fluid, tiny gas bubbles made of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. When you stretch or pull a joint just right, it rapidly drops the pressure inside, forcing the gas to escape like opening a shaken soda can. The result? That oh-so-satisfying pop. This process is called cavitation, and spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with bones snapping, rubbing, or disintegrating into oblivion. Your back, neck, toes, any synovial joint can crack under the right conditions. It's just physics at work. No horror movie sound effects needed. And if you're the type who likes cracking on repeat, you might have noticed something frustrating. You can't do it again right away. That's because once the gas escapes, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes for the bubbles to dissolve back into the synovial fluid. Until then, you're out of luck, like a soda gone flat. Still, knuckle crackers have been haunted by one question for years. Is this habit secretly ruining their joints? Some claim it weakens grip strength. Others swear it's a one-way ticket to arthritis. And yet, despite decades of finger-wagging warnings, millions of people keep cracking away. So, what does science actually say? Is knuckle cracking harmless, or are we all just one pop away from a lifetime of regret? The arthritis myth origins. Like many persistent health myths, it likely started with annoyed parents and teachers who just wanted kids to stop making that sound. When you don't have a solid reason to stop someone from doing something, what's the easiest way to shut it down? Threaten them with a terrible consequence. Keep doing that, and you'll ruin your hands for life. Classic scare tactic. But the first time this myth actually showed up in medical discussions was in the early 1900s, when doctors started making educated guesses about joint health. Back then, arthritis was poorly understood, and anything that involved joints making weird noises seemed suspicious. Some early medical texts suggested that excessive joint movement could lead to problems later in life, but there was no actual proof, just speculation. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, and the arthritis claim had become medical folklore. It was repeated so often that even doctors started accepting it as truth, despite having no real studies to back it up. It didn't help that arthritis itself is a mysterious, slow-developing condition with multiple causes. So, blaming it on something as common as knuckle cracking? Easy. Then came the game changer, a doctor who decided to put the myth to the test, on himself. In the 1960s, Dr. Donald Unger, a researcher with a sense of humor and a lot of patience, spent 50 years cracking the knuckles on just one hand while leaving the other untouched. The result? No arthritis, not even a little. His findings were later backed up by larger studies, proving that habitual knuckle cracking does not lead to arthritis. But despite scientific proof, the myth just won't die. Why? Because fear sticks. And let's be honest, people want to believe there's a consequence for an annoying habit. Research on knuckle cracking. All right, time to settle this once and for all. Does cracking your knuckles actually cause arthritis, or have we all been lied to? The good news, science has receipts. Let's start with the most famous case of my body, my experiment. In the 1960s, Dr. Donald Unger, a man with equal parts scientific curiosity and sheer stubbornness, decided to crack the knuckles on his left hand every single day for 50 years, while leaving his right hand untouched. His goal? To see if he'd develop arthritis in one hand and not the other. Half a century later, he had his answer: zero arthritis in either hand. For his work, he was even awarded an Ig Nobel Prize, a parody of the Nobel Prize that celebrates quirky but legitimate scientific research. Of course, one person's hands aren't enough to settle a medical debate, so let's look at actual studies. A 1990 study in the Annals of Rheumatic Diseases compared 300 adults, some chronic knuckle crackers, others non-crackers. The result? No increased arthritis risk for those who cracked their knuckles regularly. A 2011 study in the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine backed this up, finding no correlation between knuckle cracking and joint disease. So, if it doesn't cause arthritis, does it at least do something bad? Maybe weaken grip strength, increase joint swelling, cause long-term damage? Science says, probably not. A 1998 study found that frequent knuckle crackers had slightly looser grip strength, but not in a way that affected daily function. Another study found mild swelling in some habitual crackers, but nothing serious enough to be classified as damage. And yet, despite all this research, the myth just won't die. Why? Because once an idea gets lodged into public consciousness, it takes more than facts to shake it loose. Bottom line, knuckle cracking isn't giving you arthritis. But if you're looking for a real reason to stop, let's just say some people find it extremely annoying. And that might be a bigger problem than arthritis. Does it weaken your grip? Alright, so we've settled the arthritis debate. Cracking your knuckles does not destroy your joints. But what about your grip? Maybe it doesn't wreck your hands, but does it make them weaker over time? That theory comes from the idea that habitual joint cracking could stretch out ligaments or damage tendons, leading to weaker hands. On paper, it sounds plausible. But when you look at the actual research, the evidence is flimsy at best. Let's start with the 1990 study in the Annals of Rheumatic Diseases, the same one that disproved the arthritis myth. It looked at 300 adults, half of whom cracked their knuckles regularly, while the other half never did. The result? No significant difference in grip strength between the two groups. A 1998 study from the Uniformed Services University tried to take this a step further by measuring hand function in habitual crackers. It found that those who cracked their knuckles daily for decades had slightly looser grip strength, but nothing drastic. Their hands still worked fine, no loss of dexterity, no difficulty performing tasks. The difference was so small that researchers couldn't even say for sure if it was due to cracking or just normal variations in hand strength. So, does cracking your knuckles make your grip weaker? Not really. But if you want to get technical, there's one potential side effect: temporary joint swelling. A few studies have noted that frequent knuckle crackers sometimes experience minor, short-term puffiness in their fingers. Nothing painful, nothing permanent. Just slightly puffier hands for a little while after a cracking session. Of course, if you're someone who lives for a firm handshake, you might want to keep an eye on that. Or, just stretch before a high-stakes grip test. At the end of the day, your grip strength comes down to muscle, not joint popping. If you want a strong grip, you're better off doing wrist curls and deadlifts instead of worrying about whether your cracking habit is holding you back. Is there a right or wrong way to crack? Everyone has their own style. Some people gently pull their fingers, others press them down like they're closing a Tupperware lid, and then there are the enthusiasts, the ones who twist, yank, and contort their hands like they're unlocking a medieval treasure chest. But does technique actually matter? Turns out, it kind of does. The safest way to crack? A gentle, natural movement. Pulling or pressing lightly on a joint lets the pressure drop without putting extra stress on anything else. No need to go full chiropractor on yourself. The wrong way? Forcing it. Some people crank their fingers like they're revving an engine. That might get a louder pop, but it's not making the crack any better. It's just stretching ligaments more than necessary. Excessive twisting or bending can also irritate tendons, leading to soreness, swelling, or that weird stiff feeling afterward. Some people don't just crack their knuckles. They turn their entire hands into a makeshift percussion instrument. Wrists, elbows, even their necks. And while most of these are harmless, cracking joints with too much force, unnatural angle can increase stress on connective tissues, making them more prone to irritation. If cracking hurts, it's not the cracking that's the problem, it's how you're doing it. No joint pop should come with pain. If it does, you're either being way too aggressive, or your joints are trying to tell you something. Maybe they're just tired of being yanked around like a stubborn jar lid. There's also the social side of cracking. Ever notice how some people instinctively wince when they hear it? Some find it satisfying, others hear it and react like you just scratched a chalkboard. If you're surrounded by people who visibly cringe every time you go for a crack, maybe save it for when they're out of earshot. So, is there a right way to crack? Yes. The way that doesn't leave you rubbing your fingers afterward. Your joints will thank you, and so will everyone who just watched you twist your wrist like you were trying to escape handcuffs. Why do people crack? For some, it's an unconscious habit. For others, it's like a stress relief button built right into their fingers. But what's really behind this pop obsession? First, let's talk about that oddly satisfying feeling. When you crack a knuckle, you're rapidly stretching the joint capsule, which momentarily relieves tension. Some researchers believe this activates mechanoreceptors, special sensory cells in your joints that respond to movement. The result? a brief sense of relief, like stretching after sitting too long. Then there's the sound itself. Some people find the pop addictive in the same way bubble wrap is irresistible. You know who you are. The auditory feedback makes it feel like you've reset your fingers, even if nothing is actually changing inside your joints. For a lot of people, knuckle cracking is a nervous habit, just like tapping a foot or twirling hair. It often kicks in when people are anxious, bored, or focused. In fact, a 2011 study in the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine found that knuckle cracking was more common in people who described themselves as nervous or restless. Ever noticed yourself cracking your knuckles before a big test, an interview, or just while binge-watching TV? That's because your brain associates the action with stress relief, and once a habit forms, it sticks, whether it actually serves a purpose or not. Is it an addiction? Technically, no. There's no chemical dependency, no withdrawal symptoms, no need for a support group. But for chronic crackers, breaking the habit can feel weirdly difficult. Why? Because your brain loves repetitive behaviors that provide instant feedback. If you've ever tried to quit cracking cold turkey, you probably noticed your fingers felt like they needed to be popped. That's not actual joint tension, it's just your brain expecting the usual routine. And like any habit, the more you do it, the harder it is to stop. Does it damage joints? The concern comes from the idea that repeated stretching of the joint capsule could loosen ligaments, destabilize the joint, or even cause cartilage wear. In theory, excessive cracking could put stress on the structures inside your fingers. But in reality, there's no solid evidence that this actually happens. Let's start with what we do know. The synovial fluid in your joints acts as a natural lubricant, and the gas bubbles inside it are constantly forming and dissolving. Cracking your knuckles doesn't change the structure of the joint, it just momentarily shifts the pressure inside. So unless you're aggressively yanking on your fingers like you're trying to dislocate them, your cartilage isn't taking a beating every time you crack. Studies have looked at whether habitual knuckle crackers show signs of long-term damage, and so far, nothing alarming has turned up. The 1990 study in the Annals of Rheumatic Diseases found no difference in joint health between lifelong crackers and non-crackers. A 2011 study in the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine confirmed the same. No evidence of cartilage loss, chronic inflammation, or joint instability. There is, however, one small catch. If you're cracking in a way that causes pain, swelling, or discomfort, you might be dealing with an underlying joint issue. Some people mistake regular joint noises for knuckle cracking, but if your fingers hurt when they pop, that's not normal. Painful joint cracking could signal an issue like ligament strain, inflammation, or an early-stage joint condition. So does knuckle cracking damage your joints? Not unless you're forcing it to the point of pain. Your hands aren't falling apart, and your cartilage isn't disintegrating with every pop. But if your fingers are sore after cracking, that's a different story. One that might need an actual doctor's opinion. Other joint noises explained. Knuckles aren't the only parts of the body that make weird noises. If you've ever stood up and heard your knees pop, moved your neck and felt a crack, or rotated your shoulders and got a full symphony of clicks, you know what we're talking about. But are these sounds normal, or are your joints trying to send a distress signal? First off, most of these noises are completely harmless. Just like knuckle cracking, a lot of them come from cavitation, the same gas bubble process that happens in your fingers. When you move a joint a certain way, pressure changes inside the synovial fluid, and pop! Gas is released, making that familiar cracking sound. But what about those random clicks and creaks that happen without intentional cracking? That's where things get a little more interesting. Some joint noises are caused by tendons or ligaments snapping over bone. This happens when connective tissues momentarily shift position as you move, then snap back into place. It's common in the knees, shoulders, and hips, especially when you're stretching or changing positions. Unless it's painful, it's usually nothing to worry about. Then there's crepitus, which is a fancy way of describing a crunchy or grinding sensation in the joints. It sounds dramatic, but in most cases, it's just harmless friction between joint surfaces, especially as people age and their cartilage naturally wears down a little. However, if crepitus is accompanied by pain, swelling, or stiffness, it could be a sign of arthritis or joint damage. So, when should you actually be concerned about a joint noise? The general rule: if it doesn't hurt, it's probably fine. Occasional pops, cracks, and clicks are just the mechanics of your body at work. But if a noise is paired with pain, swelling, or a limited range of motion, that's a different story and might warrant a visit to a doctor. Bottom line, your body is full of built-in sound effects. Most of them are harmless, some are oddly satisfying, and a few might be worth paying attention to. But if you're worried that your joints are making a little too much noise, maybe the next chapter will give you something else to focus on. Because now we're talking about why people get irrationally annoyed by knuckle cracking. Why some find it annoying. A big part of it comes down to misophonia, a phenomenon where certain sounds trigger irritation, or even rage in some people. While it's usually associated with chewing noises or repetitive tapping, knuckle cracking is another common offender. Something about that sharp, unpredictable pop makes it unbearable for certain individuals. Their brains interpret it as a disruptive, intrusive sound, even though, logically, it poses no real harm. Then there's the association factor. Since childhood, many people were told that knuckle cracking is bad for you. Whether or not they believed it, the warning stuck. So when they hear someone cracking away, it subconsciously feels like they're witnessing someone actively damaging their joints, even though that's not actually happening. It's the same reason some people flinch when someone cracks their neck, even if there's no medical reason to react. And let's not forget plain old social norms. Some sounds are just considered impolite: burping, loud chewing, slurping. So when a noise like knuckle cracking falls into that same category for some people, it automatically feels annoying. It doesn't help that the sound is sharp, unpredictable, and repetitive, making it stand out in quiet spaces. Of course, some people just love to be irritated. If someone already finds you mildly annoying, guess what? Your knuckle cracking just became their new least favorite thing. So, while cracking your knuckles won't ruin your joints, it might ruin someone's patience. If you're surrounded by people who can't stand the sound, maybe show a little mercy, or at least save it for when they're out of earshot. Can it cause swelling? If you've ever cracked your knuckles and noticed they look a little puffier afterward, you might be wondering, is this normal? The short answer? Sometimes, but it's nothing to worry about. For most people, cracking their knuckles doesn't cause any noticeable swelling. But if you're a chronic, aggressive cracker, you might experience temporary puffiness in your fingers. Why? Because when you repeatedly stretch your joint capsule, fluid can shift slightly within the joint, creating a bit of mild, short-term inflammation. This isn't the same as actual joint damage. It's more like your fingers reacting to repeated movement. A 1998 study on habitual knuckle crackers found that while there was no sign of arthritis or serious joint problems, some frequent crackers had minor swelling and reduced grip strength. However, the changes were small, and researchers couldn't say for sure if they were caused by cracking or just natural variations in hand function. The key takeaway? If your fingers swell up and feel stiff or painful after cracking, that's not normal. Occasional puffiness is fine, but persistent swelling could be a sign of an underlying joint issue, like inflammation from another condition. Now, let's talk about the real issue. If you're using way too much force to crack your knuckles, you could be causing irritation, not from the cracking itself, but from excessive strain on the ligaments. Pulling, twisting, or bending your fingers aggressively might not damage the bones, but it can put unnecessary stress on the soft tissue around the joint. Basically, if you have to yank your fingers like you're trying to start a lawnmower, you're probably overdoing it. So, does cracking your knuckles cause serious swelling? Not unless you're going overboard. If your fingers are blowing up like balloons every time you crack them, you're either being too forceful or there's another issue at play. Should you stop cracking? By now, we've debunked just about every terrifying claim about knuckle cracking. No, it won't give you arthritis. No, it won't destroy your grip. No, your fingers aren't slowly swelling into unrecognizable sausages. So, with all that in mind, should you even bother trying to quit? If you like cracking your knuckles and it doesn't cause pain, you have no medical reason to stop. Studies have consistently shown that habitual knuckle cracking doesn't lead to any serious joint problems. If anything, the biggest risk is annoying the people around you. And let's be honest, that might be more dangerous than arthritis in some situations. That said, if your cracking habit is excessive or forceful, you might want to rein it in a little. While cracking itself isn't harmful, aggressively pulling or twisting your fingers could put unnecessary strain on your ligaments and tendons. There's a difference between a casual pop and yanking on your joints like you're trying to break out of handcuffs. Another reason to cut back? If cracking comes with pain, stiffness, or persistent swelling, something else might be going on. Healthy joints shouldn't hurt when they pop. If you're feeling discomfort, it could be a sign of joint inflammation, ligament strain, or an underlying condition. In that case, it's worth checking in with a doctor. Of course, if you just want to quit because the sound drives your friends and coworkers up the wall, good luck. Knuckle cracking is often an unconscious habit, making it tough to break. Some people find that keeping their hands busy, squeezing a stress ball, tapping a pen, helps reduce the urge. Others go cold turkey and suffer through the strangely unsatisfying silence. But if you're cracking purely out of habit, and not because your hands feel tight, it's just that, a habit. One that, despite decades of warnings, isn't actually wrecking your joints. So should you stop cracking? Only if you want to. Because at the end of the day, science says your knuckles are fine, even if half the people in your life wish you'd knock it off.